The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Rose Silverwood ran through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, her white wedding dress catching on brambles and dirt. A forced marriage was not her fate, not if she had anything to say about it. Her lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, the distant sound of angry voices growing closer. The wooden church stood like a sentinel at the edge of town, her only hope for sanctuary on this cruel summer evening in 1875. Rose's heart pounded against her ribs as she yanked open the heavy church door and slipped inside. The cool interior offered momentary relief as she scanned the empty pews and altar. No sign of Reverend Phillips, the church was deserted, just as she had hoped. Moving quickly, she ducked behind the door, pressing herself against the wall, her wedding dress crumpling around her. "I will not marry that monster," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. Jasper Thornton was the most feared man in the territory, a cattle baron with blood on his hands and 30 years her senior. Her father's gambling debts had sealed her fate, or so everyone thought. Outside, the voices grew louder. Her father and Thornton's men were searching for her. "Check the church," her father's voice commanded. "That ungrateful daughter of mine can't have gone far." Rose's breath caught in her throat. The footsteps approached, and she pressed herself harder against the wall, praying for a miracle. The door creaked open, letting in a sliver of dying sunlight. But it wasn't her father who entered. A tall figure slipped inside, boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. Rose stifled a gasp as the stranger turned, revealing the face of a man she'd glimpsed only a few times around town, Quinn Remington, a cowboy who worked at the Thompson Ranch outside of town. His eyes widened slightly as he spotted her hiding place. For a terrible moment, neither moved. Then the shouts outside grew closer. Quinn strode purposefully to her hiding spot, opened the door wider, and extended his hand. His eyes, deep blue like the Montana sky, met hers with unexpected gentleness. "Come with me," he said simply, his voice low and urgent. Rose hesitated, clutching the torn lace of her wedding dress. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "Because no one should be forced to the altar," he replied, his gaze never leaving hers. "I have a horse waiting. We need to move now." The voices outside grew clearer. It was now or never. Rose took his hand, her fingers trembling against his calloused palm. His grip tightened reassuringly as he led her toward the back of the church, through a small door that opened to a narrow path behind the building. True to his word, a chestnut mare waited, tethered to a post. With surprising strength, Quinn lifted Rose onto the saddle before mounting behind her. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, his body warm against her back. "Hold tight," he murmured, his breath tickling her ear. The horse bolted forward just as angry voices erupted from the church. Rose clung to the saddle horn, her veil tearing away in the wind as they galloped into the gathering darkness. The rolling hills swallowed them as Quinn guided the horse off the main trail and into the wilderness. Rose had never ridden so fast in her life. The land flew beneath them as they put distance between themselves and Redemption Creek. The white dress billowed around her legs, dirt and grass stains already marring the expensive fabric her father had insisted upon. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the thundering hooves. "Somewhere they won't look right away," Quinn answered, guiding the horse toward a stand of cottonwoods in the distance. "My friend has a cabin about 10 miles from here. We'll be safe there for tonight." As they rode, Rose's mind raced with questions. Why was this stranger risking himself for her? Quinn Remington had a reputation as a loner, a hard worker who kept to himself. Some whispered he had a past he was running from, though no one seemed to know what it was. After what seemed like hours, they approached a small cabin nestled against the foothills. Smoke curled from the chimney and a faint light glowed from within. Quinn slowed the horse to a walk and dismounted, helping Rose down with gentle hands. Her legs trembled beneath her, unused to such hard riding. She stumbled slightly, and Quinn caught her elbow to steady her. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how intimate the gesture felt in the darkness. He nodded once, then led the horse to a small stable beside the cabin. Rose stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with herself in this unfamiliar place. Her wedding dress, once pristine and flowing, now hung in tatters around her ankles. The cabin door opened, and a grizzled older man appeared, a rifle casually propped against his shoulder. "Thought I heard someone approaching," the man called out. His eyes widened at the sight of Rose in her bedraggled wedding finery. "Quinn, you've got some explaining to do." "Rufus," Quinn acknowledged. "This is Rose Silverwood. She needed help." Rufus snorted. "I can see that. Looks like you stole yourself a bride." Rose stepped forward, finding her voice. "He didn't steal me. He saved me from a forced marriage to Jasper Thornton." At the mention of Thornton's name, Rufus's expression darkened. "Thornton, eh? Well, that changes things. Come inside before you catch your death." The cabin was small but warm, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. A pot of something savory smelling hung over the flames. Rose stood awkwardly in the center of the room, acutely aware of her ruined dress and disheveled appearance. "You must be hungry," Rufus said, gesturing to the pot. "Got some rabbit stew, not fancy, but it'll fill your belly." "Thank you," Rose said, genuinely grateful. She hadn't eaten since morning, too sick with dread about the wedding to manage more than a few bites of breakfast. Quinn returned from settling the horse and stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the night. "Thornton's men will be searching. We'll need to leave at first light." "Where will we go?" Rose asked, suddenly realizing the enormity of what she'd done. She had no money, no possessions beyond the ruined dress she wore. Quinn's eyes met hers across the room. "I have a place in mind, but first you should eat and rest." Rufus rummaged in a trunk and pulled out some clothing. "My daughter's things. She's married and gone to California now. They'll be too big, but better than that torn-up dress." Rose accepted the simple skirt and blouse with gratitude. Rufus showed her to a small partition where she could change in privacy. Peeling off the wedding dress was like shedding a skin she'd been forced to wear. The simple clothes felt like freedom. When she emerged, both men were seated at the rough-hewn table, bowls of stew before them. A third waited for her. She sat and ate hungrily, the simple fare tasting better than any fine meal she'd had in her father's house. "How did you know I was in the church?" she finally asked Quinn. He looked up, his expression guarded. "I was riding past when I saw you run in. Then I spotted your father and Thornton's men searching for you." He paused. "I've seen what happens to women forced to marry men like Thornton." There was something in his voice, a personal pain that made Rose wonder what his story was. "You risked a lot," she said softly. "Thornton isn't known for his forgiveness." "Some things are worth the risk," Quinn replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment before returning to his meal. After dinner, Rufus insisted Rose take the only bed while he and Quinn would sleep near the fire. Exhaustion overtook her the moment her head touched the pillow, and she fell into a deep sleep. She woke to Quinn's gentle touch on her shoulder. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten. "We need to go," he said quietly. Rufus spotted some riders in the distance. Fear jolted through her. "Already, Thornton has men everywhere. Here," he handed her a bundle. "Some provisions and a change of clothes. Rufus's daughter left more than I thought." Rose dressed quickly in the sturdy riding clothes, a split skirt that would allow her to ride astride properly. When she emerged, Quinn had the horse saddled and ready. Rufus handed her a small knife in a leather sheath. "Keep this close," the older man advised. "World's not always kind to young women on their own." "Thank you for everything," Rose said, impulsively hugging the grizzled man. Rufus looked embarrassed but pleased. "You take care of her, Quinn, and watch yourself." Quinn nodded solemnly, then helped Rose onto the horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away, Rose glanced back to see Rufus standing in the doorway of his cabin, raising a hand in farewell. They rode hard through the morning, keeping to the foothills rather than the open plains. Quinn was mostly silent, his attention focused on watching for pursuit. By midday, they stopped beside a small creek to rest the horse. "Where exactly are we heading?" Rose asked as she splashed cool water on her face. Quinn crouched beside her. "There's a small settlement about 3 days' ride from here. Silver Creek. It's far enough from Thornton's territory that you might be safe there." "And then what?" Rose asked, the reality of her situation sinking in. "I have no money, no skills." Quinn looked at her thoughtfully. "You must have some skills," Rose considered. "I can read and write well. I kept my father's books for his store before." She trailed off, not wanting to think about how her father had gambled away the business, then tried to settle his debts by selling her to Thornton. "That's valuable," Quinn said. "Silver Creek has a small newspaper. The owner mentioned needing help." Hope flickered in Rose. Perhaps there was a future for her after all. They continued their journey, stopping only when necessary. Each night, Quinn insisted on making a separate bedroll for himself, maintaining a respectful distance that Rose found both proper and slightly disappointing. There was something about this quiet cowboy that drew her to him. On the second night, as they sat beside a small, nearly smokeless fire, Rose finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why did you really help me, Quinn? The truth this time." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his gaze fixed on the flames. "I had a sister, Clara. She was forced to marry a man like Thornton back in Texas, a cattle baron who saw her as property." His jaw tightened. "She died 6 months later. They called it an accident, but—" "I'm so sorry," Rose whispered, understanding now why he had risked himself for a woman he barely knew. Quinn looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "When I saw you running into that church, I saw Clara. I couldn't stand by and let it happen again." Rose reached across the space between them and touched his hand. "Thank you for saving me." His fingers curled around hers briefly before he pulled away, but something had shifted between them, a trust, perhaps, or something more. The next day, as they rode through a narrow canyon, Quinn suddenly tensed. He reined in the horse sharply, his head cocked as though listening. "What is it?" Rose whispered. "Riders," he said grimly, "more than one, coming fast." He guided the horse off the trail and into a stand of pines, dismounting quickly and helping Rose down. "Stay with the horse," he instructed, drawing his revolver and moving back toward the trail. Rose's heart hammered in her chest as she held the horse's reins, trying to keep the animal quiet. Minutes stretched like hours until the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Through the trees, she could see 4 riders passing on the trail, their dust-covered clothes bearing Thornton's ranch insignia. Quinn remained perfectly still until the riders had passed, then returned to her side. "They're heading the way we came. They must have lost our trail." Relief flooded through Rose, but it was short-lived. "They'll eventually double back, won't they?" Quinn nodded grimly. "We need to change our route. There's another way to Silver Creek, but it's longer and rougher terrain." "Whatever it takes," Rose said firmly. "I'm not going back." The admiration in Quinn's eyes warmed her more than she expected. "You're braver than you know, Rose Silverwood." They set off on the new route, which took them higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler as they ascended, and the terrain more challenging. Quinn demonstrated unexpected patience, teaching Rose how to navigate the difficult passages, how to sit properly in the saddle to make it easier on the horse. By nightfall, they had reached a high plateau with a stunning view of the valley below. As Quinn prepared their simple camp, Rose stared out at the vast landscape, feeling both small and strangely free. "It's beautiful up here," she said when Quinn joined her. "It is," he agreed, his shoulder almost touching hers as they stood side by side. "Different kind of beauty than what you're used to in town, I expect." Rose smiled ruefully. "Redemption Creek has its charms, but this—" She gestured to the panorama before them. "This feels like freedom." Quinn studied her profile in the fading light. "Freedom comes with its own dangers." "I'll take those dangers over a cage, no matter how gilded," she replied, his expression softened. "You would have made a poor trophy wife." "The worst," she agreed, laughing for what felt like the first time in months. That night, their camp felt different. Quinn sat closer to her by the fire, and they talked longer than they had before. He told her about growing up in Texas, about working cattle drives before settling in Montana territory. She shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis before her mother's death had prompted her father to move west in search of a fresh start. "He wasn't always like this," Rose said softly, poking at the fire with a stick. "My father, I mean. The gambling took hold after Mother died. It was like he was trying to win against death itself." Quinn nodded. "Grief does strange things to a man. Is that what brought you to Montana?" "Grief over your sister." He was quiet for a moment. "Partly. And partly running from what I might do if I stayed in Texas near the man who killed her." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within Rose. Without thinking, she moved closer and laid her hand on his arm. I'm glad you came to Montana. Not just because you saved me, but because I'm glad to know you, Quinn Remington. His eyes, dark in the firelight, met hers. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared pain and perhaps something more hopeful. For a breathless moment, Rose thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently covered her hand with his own. We should rest, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Tomorrow will be a hard ride. Rose nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. As she settled into her bedroll, she realized with startling clarity that she was developing feelings for this quiet, honorable cowboy who had risked everything to save her. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack before breaking camp. As Quinn had predicted, the day's journey was challenging, taking them through steep ravines and across rocky terrain where the horse had to pick its way carefully. By midday, they had descended into a lush valley with a rushing stream. They stopped to rest and water the horse. Rose knelt by the stream to fill their canteens when a sudden noise made her look up. A magnificent elk stood on the opposite bank, regarding them with alert eyes. Rose froze, afraid to move and scare the creature away. Behind her, she heard Quinn stop what he was doing. For a long moment, they all remained still, woman, man, and wild creature in perfect tableau. Then, with a graceful bound, the elk disappeared into the forest. That was incredible, Rose breathed. Quinn smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his serious face. Good luck to see an elk that close. My people would say it's a blessing on your journey. Your people? Rose asked, curious. A shadow crossed his face. My mother was Cheyenne. My father was a trapper who actually married her properly, not like most white men who took Indian women. Rose absorbed this new information. It explained his deep knowledge of the land, his ability to move silently, to read trails invisible to her eyes. Is that why you keep to yourself in town? She asked gently. Quinn shrugged. People have their opinions about half-breeds, easier to avoid trouble by staying clear of it. That's not fair, Rose said, indignant on his behalf. Not much is, he replied simply, but you learn to make your way. They continued their journey through the afternoon. As the sun began its descent, Quinn pointed to smoke rising in the distance. Silver Creek, he said. We'll reach it by nightfall. Rose felt a conflicting mix of emotions. Relief at reaching safety warred with a strange reluctance. Once they reached town, what would become of her and Quinn? Would he simply leave her there and return to his solitary life? The thought troubled her more than she wanted to admit. Silver Creek proved to be smaller than Redemption Creek, but it had a bustling main street with several businesses, including the newspaper office Quinn had mentioned. They arrived as the sun was setting, attracting curious glances from townsfolk closing up shops and heading home for the evening. Quinn guided the horse to a modest hotel at the edge of town. We'll get a room for you here, he said, helping her dismount. Tomorrow we can speak to Mr. Harding at the newspaper about work. Rose looked up at him. And you, where will you stay? There's a livery stable that rents beds to travelers, he replied. I'll be fine there. Oh, she couldn't hide her disappointment. Quinn's expression softened. Rose, you're safe now, but your reputation won't be if we stay too close. She knew he was right, but it didn't ease the ache in her chest. Will I see you tomorrow? Of course, I promise to help you get settled. He hesitated, and I'm not in a hurry to leave. The simple admission made her heart leap. Good, she said softly. I'm not in a hurry for you to go. The hotel was clean and modest, run by a no-nonsense widow named Mrs. Beckett, who raised an eyebrow at Rose's trail-worn appearance, but asked no questions when Quinn paid for a week's lodging in advance. Breakfast is at 7 sharp, Mrs. Beckett informed Rose as she showed her to a small but comfortable room. No gentleman callers after 8 in the evening. Rose blushed at the implication, but nodded her understanding. After days on the trail, the sight of a real bed and a washbasin filled with clean water seemed like unimaginable luxury. Quinn brought up her saddlebags, lingering awkwardly at the door. I'll come by in the morning, he said. We can see about that newspaper job. Thank you, Quinn. For everything. The words seemed woefully inadequate for all he had done. He nodded, his eyes holding hers for a long moment before he turned to go. Rose watched him walk away, fighting the urge to call him back. That night, despite the comfortable bed, Rose slept fitfully. Her dreams were a confused jumble of wedding veils, galloping horses, and Quinn's blue eyes looking at her with an intensity that made her wake breathless in the darkness. Morning came with the promised breakfast at 7. Rose had dressed in the best of the clothes. Rufus had given her a simple blue skirt and white blouse that had belonged to his daughter. She had washed her hair and pinned it up neatly, wanting to make a good impression for the job inquiry. Quinn was waiting in the small dining room, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. Something fluttered in Rose's chest at the sight of him. He stood when she entered, an old-world courtesy that touched her. "You look." He seemed to search for the right word, rested. Rose smiled, sensing he had intended to say something else. A real bed works wonders after sleeping on the ground. They walked together to the newspaper office, Quinn briefing her on what he knew of William Harding, the owner and editor. He's fair-minded, came out west after the war. Lost an arm at Gettysburg, but it doesn't slow him down much. The Silver Creek Sentinel occupied a narrow building on the main street. Inside, the front room housed a counter for placing advertisements and subscriptions, while the back contained the printing press and editor's desk. A thin man with one empty sleeve pinned neatly to his shoulder was setting type when they entered. "Mr. Harding," Quinn called. The editor looked up, recognition dawning on his face. "Remington, didn't expect to see you in town." His sharp eyes moved to Rose. "And who might this be?" "Rose Silverwood," she introduced herself, stepping forward. "I understand you might need assistance with your newspaper." Harding assessed her with intelligent eyes. "You have experience in publishing, Miss Silverwood." "Not in publishing specifically, but I'm well educated and kept the books for my father's mercantile for several years. I'm a quick learner." She met his gaze steadily, determination overriding her nervousness. "Can you write?" Harding asked bluntly. "Yes, sir, quite well. Show me." He gestured to his desk. "Write me a paragraph about your journey to Silver Creek. Leave out anything scandalous," he added with a knowing glance at Quinn. Rose sat at the desk, picked up a pen, and began to write. She described the beauty of the Montana wilderness, the elk they had seen, the view from the high plateau. She wrote about the promise of new beginnings that Silver Creek represented, carefully omitting the circumstances that had brought her there. When she finished, she handed the paper to Harding, who read it silently, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he looked up. "You write better than half the correspondents who send me news from the outlying ranches." He set the paper down. "I need someone to handle subscriptions, take down advertisements, and occasionally write pieces when I'm short-handed. The pay is modest, but it includes a small room above the office if you need accommodation." Rose's heart soared. "I accept, Mr. Harding. When can I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp." He turned to Quinn. "You vouching for her, Remington?" Quinn nodded. "She's trustworthy." "That's good enough for me. You've always been a straight shooter." Harding extended his hand to Rose. "Welcome to the Sentinel, Miss Silverwood." Outside, Rose could barely contain her excitement. "I can't believe it was that easy. I have a job, a place to live." She stopped, realizing what this meant. "I won't be needing the hotel after tonight." Quinn smiled, though something like sadness flickered in his eyes. "You're getting settled faster than I expected." "Thanks to you," she said softly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," he replied. "Knowing you're safe and have a chance at a new life is enough." They walked back toward the hotel in companionable silence. Rose's joy at securing employment was tempered by the growing realization that Quinn would likely leave soon. The thought opened a hollow feeling in her chest. "Will you stay in Silver Creek a while longer?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Quinn hesitated. "I should get back to the Thompson Ranch. They'll be wondering where I am." "Of course," she said, disappointment settling heavy in her stomach. "You have responsibilities." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Rose," he seemed to struggle with his words. "I'm glad I was there that day." "At the church?" "So am I," she whispered. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. Rose wanted desperately for him to say he would stay or that he would come back to see her. The moment was broken by a cheerful voice calling Quinn's name. They turned to see a man approaching, hand extended in greeting. Quinn Remington, thought that was you, been a while since you graced our little town. Joe, Quinn shook the man's hand. Good to see you. You here for the cattle auction? Joe asked. Quinn shook his head, just passing through. Joe, this is Rose Silverwood. She's taking a position at the Sentinel with Harding. Pleasure, madam, Joe said, tipping his hat to Rose. Harding's a good sort, you'll do well with him. He turned back to Quinn. Say, if you're not in a hurry, Phillips is looking for help moving a small herd to Fort Benton, paying good money for experienced hands. Rose watched Quinn's face, seeing him consider the offer. Fort Benton was in the opposite direction from Redemption Creek, and far enough that Thornton's influence wouldn't reach. How long would the drive take? Quinn asked. 2 weeks there and back, Joe replied. Phillips is at the saloon now if you want to talk terms. Quinn glanced at Rose. Would you excuse me for a bit? I'd like to speak with Phillips. Of course, she said, hope rising within her. If Quinn took the job, he would be in Silver Creek for at least a little while longer. Joe bid them farewell, and Quinn walked Rose back to the hotel. I'll come find you after I speak with Phillips, he promised. Rose spent the afternoon moving her few belongings to the room above the newspaper office. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. She arranged Rufus's daughter's clothes in the small chest of drawers, marveling at how her life had changed in just a few days. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Quinn standing there, his expression unreadable. You took the job? She asked immediately. He nodded. I leave tomorrow with Phillips and will be back in about 2 weeks. Relief and happiness flooded through her. That's wonderful. I mean, the job must pay well. A slight smile tugged at his lips. Well enough. But that's not why I took it. No, she asked, her pulse quickening. No. He met her eyes directly. I took it because I'm not ready to say goodbye to you, Rose Silverwood. The simple honesty of his words stole her breath. I'm not ready for that either, she admitted. They stood looking at each other, the narrow doorway creating an intimacy between them. Quinn finally broke the silence. I should let you get settled, but I was hoping you might join me for dinner at the hotel as a celebration of your new position. I'd like that very much, Rose said, unable to keep the smile from her face. Dinner was the most enjoyable meal Rose could remember having in years. Away from the trail and immediate danger, she saw a different side of Quinn. He was still quiet compared to most men, but he had a dry wit that surprised her into laughter several times. He told her stories of cattle drives and the characters he had met in his travels, while she shared memories of her childhood in St. Louis and her dreams of someday writing stories, not just keeping ledgers. You should write for Harding's paper, Quinn suggested. Not just taking advertisements, but real stories. Perhaps I will, Rose mused. Once I've proven myself. As the evening drew to a close, Quinn walked her back to the newspaper office. The night was cool and clear, stars blazing overhead in a way they never seemed to in the city. Will you be careful on the cattle drive? Rose asked as they reached her door. Always, he replied. It's fairly routine work. Rose nodded, suddenly shy. Quinn, she faltered, unsure how to express what she was feeling. He saved her from her awkwardness, reaching out to gently touch her cheek. I'll come find you when I return, he promised, his voice low, if that's what you want. It is, she whispered, more than anything. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it nearly undid her. Good night, Rose, he said, reluctantly releasing her hand. Good night, Quinn, she replied, watching as he walked away into the night. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Rose learned her new role at the Sentinel. William Harding proved to be a demanding but fair employer, quick to correct mistakes, but equally quick to acknowledge good work. By the end of the first week, he was allowing Rose to write small pieces for the paper announcements of social events, reports on local business developments, even a weekly column on household hints she gleaned from Mrs. Beckett and other women in town. She made friends quickly, her natural warmth and intelligence drawing people to her. She was careful about what she revealed of her past, saying only that she had come from Redemption Creek, seeking new opportunities. If anyone suspected there was more to her story, they were kind enough not to press. Throughout it all, her thoughts frequently returned to Quinn. She wondered where he was on the trail, whether he was safe, if he thought of her as often as she thought of him. The intensity of her feelings for a man she had known such a short time both thrilled and frightened her. The day Quinn was due to return, Rose found herself unable to concentrate on her work. She kept glancing out the window, watching for any sign of the returning cattle drivers. Harding noticed her distraction and shooed her away from the typesetting she was mangling. "Go on," he said gruffly. "You're useless today anyway. Take the afternoon off." Rose gratefully escaped to her room to change into her best dress, a dark green calico she had purchased with her first week's wages. She pinned her hair carefully, then chided herself for such vanity. Quinn had seen her at her worst, covered in trail dust and wearing borrowed clothes. Why was she so concerned with her appearance now? She knew the answer, of course. In the 2 weeks of his absence, she had admitted to herself that what she felt for Quinn Remington was far more than gratitude or friendship. She had fallen in love with the quiet, honorable cowboy who had risked everything to save her. Whether he felt the same remained to be seen. Late in the afternoon, word spread through town that Phillips and his men were returning. Rose hurried to the main street, her heart pounding as she searched the group of tired, dusty cowboys for Quinn's familiar figure. She spotted him near the back of the group, leading his horse rather than riding. Even at a distance, she could tell something was wrong. He was favoring his left side, his movements stiff and careful. Without thinking, she pushed through the small crowd that had gathered to welcome the returning men. "Quinn," she called. He looked up, his face lighting with a smile that made her heart turn over despite her concern. "Rose," he said simply, as though her name itself were precious to him. "You're hurt," she said as she reached him, noticing now the crude bandage visible beneath his torn shirt. "It's nothing serious," he assured her. "Had a disagreement with a steer," he made his point rather sharply. Despite his attempt at humor, Rose could see the pain in his eyes. "You need a doctor. Already saw one in Fort Benton, just needs time to heal." His eyes never left her face, drinking in the sight of her as though committing her to memory. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Rose blushed, absurdly pleased by the simple compliment. "And you look like you need rest and proper care. Where are you staying?" "Haven't figured that out yet," he admitted. "Thought I'd stable the horse first." "Come to the Sentinel," she said decisively. "I'll look at that wound properly, and Harding has a spare cot in the back room he uses when working late." Quinn started to protest, but Rose silenced him with a look that brooked no argument. She helped him stable his horse, then guided him to the newspaper office. Harding raised an eyebrow at the sight of them but asked no questions, merely nodding when Rose explained the situation. "Cot's all made up," he said. "Take whatever supplies you need from the medicine cabinet." In the back room, Rose helped Quinn remove his shirt, revealing a deep gash along his ribs that had been roughly stitched. "This isn't healing properly," she said, concerned. "It's inflamed. Trail medicine isn't the best," Quinn admitted. "Doctor did what he could, but we had to move on." Rose cleaned the wound carefully, applied a fresh poultice of herbs Mrs. Beckett had taught her to use, and bandaged it properly. Quinn watched her work, his eyes following her every movement. "You've done this before," he observed. "My mother taught me basic healing before she died," Rose explained. "And I've been learning more from Mrs. Beckett. She was a nurse during the war." When she finished, Quinn caught her hand before she could move away. "I missed you," he said simply. "Thought about you every day." The directness of his words took her breath away. "I missed you too," she confessed. "More than I should have, probably." His thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "And why is that?" "Because I've known you such a short time," she said honestly. "Yet I feel as though—" She hesitated, suddenly shy. "As though what?" he prompted gently. Rose gathered her courage. "As though I've been waiting for you my whole life." The naked emotion that crossed his face made her heart race. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quinn leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over far too soon. "I'm not a man of many words, Rose," he said, his voice rough, "but I think I've been waiting for you too." Before she could respond, the door opened and Harding stuck his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here asking after Miss Silverwood." Rose frowned. Who? Didn't give a name, older fellow, well-dressed. Harding paused. Something about him puts my back up. Thought you should know before I send him in. A cold dread settled in Rose's stomach. What does he look like? Tall, silver hair, expensive suit, has a gold watch chain with some kind of medallion. Quinn tensed beside her. Thornton, he said grimly, reaching for his gun belt. Rose's hand flew to her mouth. How did he find me? Man like that has resources, Quinn said, wincing as he stood, and connections. What do you want me to tell him? Harding asked, his good hand moving to the drawer where Rose knew he kept a revolver. Rose squared her shoulders. Tell him I'll see him, but not alone. Quinn shook his head. Rose, no, I can't run forever, Quinn, she said firmly, and I won't put you or Mr. Harding in danger. I need to face him. After a tense moment, Quinn nodded, but I'll be right beside you. Jasper Thornton was examining the printing press when Rose entered the front office, Quinn a protective presence at her shoulder. The cattle baron looked up, his cold eyes assessing her with proprietary interest that made her skin crawl. Miss Silverwood, he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. You've led me on quite a chase, Mr. Thornton, she acknowledged coolly. You've wasted your time coming here. I'm not returning to Redemption Creek. Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm afraid that's not your decision to make, my dear. Your father signed a binding contract. You are legally promised to me. Forcing a woman to marry against her will isn't legal anywhere civilized, Quinn said, his voice hard. Thornton's gaze shifted to Quinn, recognition dawning. The half-breed from Thompson's ranch, I should have known. His lip curled in contempt. You're the one who took her. I helped her escape, Quinn corrected. She came willingly, a distinction that won't matter to the law. Thornton pulled a folded paper from his jacket. I have a warrant for your arrest, Remington. Kidnapping is a serious offense. Rose felt the blood drain from her face. That's ridiculous. Quinn saved me from being forced into marriage with a man old enough to be my father. Your romantic notions are touching but irrelevant, Thornton said dismissively. The fact remains that you are legally bound to me, and this man interfered with a legal contract. There's nothing legal about selling a human being, William Harding spoke up from where he stood by the door, and I'd be very interested to examine this so-called contract. As would Judge Wilson, I expect. Judge Wilson? Thornton's confidence faltered slightly. Our circuit judge, Harding explained. He has rather strong views on the rights of women, having lost his sister to an abusive marriage. He's due in town tomorrow. Rose felt a surge of hope at this unexpected development. Quinn stood straighter beside her, his hand no longer hovering near his gun. Furthermore, Harding continued, I'd like to know how you obtained a warrant without presenting evidence to a judge. Silver Creek falls under Judge Wilson's jurisdiction, not whatever pet judge you may have in Redemption Creek. Thornton's expression darkened. This doesn't concern you, Harding. When you come into my establishment threatening my employee and her friend, it very much concerns me. Harding's voice was steel. Now, you can wait to present your case to Judge Wilson tomorrow, or you can leave. But if you attempt to take Miss Silverwood or Mr. Remington by force, you should know that the sheriff here is my brother-in-law, and he takes a dim view of outsiders causing trouble. For a long moment, the tension in the room was palpable. Then, with deliberate slowness, Thornton folded the paper and returned it to his pocket. Very well, I'll present my case to your Judge Wilson. His cold eyes fixed on Rose. Don't think this is over, my dear. What's mine, I keep. With that ominous statement, he turned and left, the door closing firmly behind him. Rose's legs suddenly felt weak and she sank into a chair. Quinn was at her side instantly, his hand warm on her shoulder. Are you all right? He asked softly. She nodded, though she felt far from all right. He won't give up easily. Neither will we, Quinn assured her. Harding cleared his throat. Judge Wilson really does arrive tomorrow, but I may have exaggerated his views somewhat. Still, he's a fair man. If this supposed contract is as coercive as I suspect, he won't enforce it. Thank you, Mr. Harding, Rose said gratefully. You didn't have to involve yourself. Harding shrugged. I've never cared for bullies, especially wealthy ones who think their money puts them above the law. He looked at Quinn. You should stay here tonight. Thornton might try something before the judge arrives. Quinn nodded his agreement. I won't leave Rose unprotected. That night, Rose found sleep impossible. She lay in her small room above the newspaper office, listening to every creak and rustle. Quinn was downstairs on the cot, insisting he was comfortable despite his injury. Harding had gone home but promised to return at first light. Around midnight, Rose heard footsteps on the stairs outside her room. She sat up in alarm, reaching for the knife Rufus had given her. Rose. Quinn's voice came softly through the door. "Are you awake?" Relief flooded through her. "Yes, come in," he entered, moving carefully in the darkness. "Thought I heard something outside, just wanted to make sure you're all right." "I can't sleep," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Thornton's face." Quinn sat on the edge of her bed, his weight making the mattress dip slightly. In the dim moonlight from the window, she could see the worry etched on his features. "We'll face this together," he promised. "Whatever happens with the judge tomorrow, I won't let him take you." Rose reached for his hand, finding comfort in his solid strength. "I'm more worried about you. That warrant may be questionable, but Thornton has influence if the judge sides with him. Then we'll leave," Quinn said simply. "I know places where Thornton's reach doesn't extend. You do that, leave everything behind." She searched his face in the darkness. "Rose," he said her name like a caress. "There's nothing here I wouldn't leave for you." The simple declaration undid her last defenses. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. Quinn turned his head to press a kiss into her palm, then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and captured her lips with his. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more certain. Rose wound her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. His hand cradled her face with infinite tenderness, as though she were something precious beyond measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I should go back downstairs," he said reluctantly. Rose kept her arms around him. "Stay," she whispered, "just to sleep. I feel safer with you here." After a moment's hesitation, Quinn nodded. He stretched out beside her on the narrow bed, careful of his injured side. Rose nestled against him, her head finding a perfect resting place on his shoulder. His arm encircled her, holding her close. For the first time since fleeing Redemption Creek, Rose fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Morning arrived all too quickly. Rose woke to find Quinn already up and dressed, looking out the window with a concerned expression. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. "Thornton's men," he said grimly. "4 of them watching the building." Rose joined him at the window. Sure enough, 4 rough-looking men loitered across the street, making no attempt to hide their surveillance. "He's not planning to wait for the judge," she realized. "No," Quinn agreed. "He'll try to take us by force if he sees an opportunity." A knock at the door downstairs interrupted them. Quinn motioned for Rose to stay back as he drew his revolver and moved carefully down the stairs. A moment later, she heard Harding's voice and relaxed. She dressed quickly and joined them in the newspaper office. Harding had brought news that Judge Wilson had indeed arrived the previous evening and would hold court at 10 o'clock. "Thornton's already spoken to him," Harding reported. "The judge has agreed to hear the matter first thing." "Will he be fair?" Rose asked anxiously. "Wilson's a straight shooter," Harding assured her, "but he's bound by the law if there's a legal contract." "There isn't," Rose said firmly. "At least I never signed anything. If my father signed something, it was without my knowledge or consent." "That may be enough," Harding said. "The judge will want to hear your side." The courthouse was a modest building on the main street. By the time they arrived, a small crowd had gathered, word having spread that something interesting was afoot. Rose held her head high as she walked between Quinn and Harding, ignoring the curious stares. Inside, Judge Wilson, a lean, gray-haired man with piercing eyes, was already seated at the bench. Jasper Thornton sat at a table to the right, looking confident and at ease. As Rose entered, his gaze fixed on her with that same proprietary look that made her skin crawl. "Miss Silverwood," the judge acknowledged as she took a seat between Quinn and Harding. "I understand you're at the center of this dispute." "Yes, Your Honor," Rose replied, determined to show no fear. The judge nodded. "Mr. Thornton has presented me with a document he claims constitutes a binding marriage contract between you and him, signed by your father as your legal guardian. Before I rule on its validity, I'd like to hear your account of the matter." Rose stood, grateful for Quinn's reassuring presence beside her. "Your Honor, I was never consulted about this arrangement. My father lost our business through gambling and apparently attempted to settle his debts by essentially selling me to Mr. Thornton. I learned of the plan only days before the wedding was to take place." "And did you consent to this marriage?" the judge asked. "Absolutely not," Rose stated firmly. "I fled rather than be forced into it," Thornton stood. "Your Honor, a daughter's wishes, while perhaps unfortunate if opposed to her father's, do not invalidate a legal contract. Mr. Silverwood had every right to arrange his daughter's marriage. Perhaps in some places," Judge Wilson replied dryly. "But this is not medieval Europe, Mr. Thornton. While a father's authority is considerable, it does not extend to treating his daughter as chattel." Hope surged in Rose's heart at the judge's words. "Furthermore," the judge continued, examining the document before him, "this so-called contract is highly irregular. It makes no mention of Miss Silverwood's consent, refers to her as property to be transferred in settlement of debt, and contains language that would be more appropriate for a bill of sale than a marriage agreement." He looked up, his expression stern. "Mr. Thornton, I find this document unconscionable and therefore unenforceable. Miss Silverwood is under no obligation to marry you or return to Redemption Creek." Relief washed over Rose like a cool wave. Beside her, Quinn released a breath she hadn't realized he was holding. Thornton's face darkened with anger. "And what of the warrant for Remington's arrest? He took what was rightfully mine." "As I have just established that Miss Silverwood was never rightfully yours, there was no kidnapping," the judge stated flatly. "The warrant, which I note was issued without proper judicial review, is hereby vacated." He banged his gavel. "This matter is closed." Thornton stood rigid with fury. "This isn't over," he growled, his eyes fixed on Rose and Quinn. "On the contrary," Judge Wilson said sharply. "It is very much over, Mr. Thornton. And I would caution you against making threats in my courtroom. The next words from your mouth had better be good day or I'll hold you in contempt." For a moment, it seemed Thornton might defy the judge. Then, with visible effort, he controlled himself. "Good day, Your Honor," he said stiffly, before turning on his heel and striding from the courtroom. Outside, Rose could barely contain her joy. "We won," she exclaimed, impulsively throwing her arms around Quinn. "It's really over." Quinn returned her embrace, though his expression remained cautious. "For now," he said quietly, "but Thornton isn't a man who accepts defeat easily." Harding clapped Quinn on the shoulder. "True enough, but he's been put on notice that the law here doesn't bend to his will." "That counts for something." As they walked back to the newspaper office, Rose noticed Thornton's men were gone from their watching position. The absence did not particularly reassure her. "What will you do now?" she asked Quinn as they reached the Sentinel. He looked at her thoughtfully. "That depends." "On what?" A small smile touched his lips. "On you." Rose's heart skipped. "Me. I took that job with Phillips partly to earn enough money for what I'm about to suggest," Quinn said, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I've been saving for a piece of land near Silver Creek. It's small, just 100 acres, but it's good grazing land with a creek running through it. The owner's willing to sell." "Your own ranch," Rose breathed. Understanding his dream, Quinn nodded. "It wouldn't be much at first. A lot of hard work and lean times, but someday." He took her hands in his. "Rose, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you hiding behind that church door." Joy bubbled up inside Rose, so intense it was almost painful. "Quinn, I love you too. These past weeks, getting to know you, I can't imagine my life without you in it." His eyes lit with a happiness that transformed his face. "Then would you consider becoming my wife? Not because of any contract or obligation, but because you choose to?" "Yes," Rose said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes." Quinn's kiss was tender and filled with promise. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't offer you a fancy house or fine things, at least not for a long while." "I don't want those things," Rose assured him. "I want a life with you, building something that's ours together." Harding cleared his throat loudly from the doorway, reminding them they weren't alone. "While this is all very touching," he he said dryly, though his eyes were kind. "I do have a newspaper to run. However," he added as Rose began to apologize, "I suppose I can spare my assistant for the rest of the day, wedding plans and all that." Rose blushed, but Quinn merely smiled. "Much appreciated, Harding." They spent the afternoon walking through Silver Creek, making plans for their future. Quinn took Rose to see the land he hoped to purchase, a beautiful piece of rolling prairie with a clear creek winding through it and a stand of cottonwoods providing natural shelter. Rose fell in love with it immediately, already envisioning the home they would build there. As the sun began to set, they stood together on a small rise overlooking the property, Quinn's arm around Rose's waist. "I keep thinking this is all a dream," Rose confessed. "A month ago, I was facing a life of misery as Thornton's wife. Now you're facing a life of hard work as a rancher's wife," Quinn said with a wry smile. "Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales." Rose turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had risked everything to save her and had ended up saving himself as well. "I disagree," she said softly. "It's exactly the stuff of fairy tales, the real ones where happiness is earned through courage and love." Quinn's eyes darkened as he bent to kiss her, the setting sun painting them in gold as they stood on the land that would become their home. They were married 2 weeks later in the Silver Creek Church, a simple ceremony with William Harding giving the bride away and Mrs. Beckett sniffling loudly in the front pew. Rose wore a dress of pale blue rather than white, a deliberate choice to distinguish this willing marriage from the forced one she had escaped. As Quinn slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Rose thought of the day he had found her hiding behind a church door, terrified and alone. How far they had come since that moment. How much had changed because he had offered his hand and said those 3 simple words, "Come with me." Their first year on the ranch was as challenging as Quinn had predicted. They started with a small herd, living in a 2-room cabin they built with help from friends in Silver Creek. Rose continued working part-time at the Sentinel, her articles about ranch life becoming popular with readers. Quinn proved to be as skilled at building a herd as he was at handling cattle, his careful breeding choices resulting in strong calves that commanded good prices. They heard that Jasper Thornton had eventually left Redemption Creek, his influence waning after his humiliation in Silver Creek. Rose's father had moved further west, still chasing the next big win. Rose had written to him once, letting him know she was well and happy, but had received no reply. She had made her peace with that loss. One evening in early spring, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset, Quinn wrapped his arm around Rose's shoulders. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed regularly, as though constantly checking to make sure she had no regrets. "Completely," she assured him, resting her head on his shoulder. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, which had just begun to show the slightest curve. Even more so now. Quinn's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Rose, are you?" She nodded, joy bubbling up at the wonder on his face. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby in the fall." Quinn's whoop of joy startled the horses in the nearby corral. He lifted Rose from her seat and spun her around, both of them laughing in pure happiness. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I never thought I could have this," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "A home, a family, a woman who loves me for who I am." Rose touched his face gently. "I never thought I'd find a man worth risking everything for," she replied. "I'm so glad I was wrong." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Quinn held his wife close, his hand protective over the new life growing within her. From the desperate flight from a forced marriage to this moment of perfect contentment, their journey had been one of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering love. And it had all begun with a cowboy who opened a church door and said, "Come with me." 5 years later, the Remington Ranch had grown into one of the most promising in the territory. Their herd had tripled in size, and the original cabin had been expanded into a comfortable home. Rose's articles for the Sentinel had been compiled into a book about frontier life that was gaining popularity back east. And their family had grown to include 4-year-old Clara, named for Quinn's sister, and 2-year-old William, named for the newspaper editor who had become like a father to Rose. On the anniversary of the day they had met, Quinn took Rose back to the rise where they had first looked over their land and dreamed of their future together. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't gone into the church that day?" he asked as they spread a blanket on the grass. Rose smiled, watching their children playing nearby under the watchful eye of Quinn's cousin who had come to help with the ranch. "Sometimes. But then I remember what my mother used to say, that some souls are destined to find each other, no matter what." Quinn pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I like that thought, that even if I hadn't opened that church door, somehow we would have found each other anyway." "We would have," Rose said with certainty, "but I'm glad it happened the way it did." As the sun began its descent, painting the prairie in gold and amber, Rose leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. From a frightened bride hiding behind a church door to a confident woman who had built a life on her own terms, her journey had been one of courage and love. And it had all begun with those 3 simple words that had changed everything: "Come with me."